The Valanthi Imperium had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years. Their empire stretched across 4,000 worlds and 3 spiral arms of the Milky Way. No species had ever defeated them in battle. No planet had ever resisted their conquest for long. They were the masters of all they surveyed, and they knew it. High Admiral Keth Varan stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Times Eternal Blade Asterisk, and studied the holographic display before him. His gray skin reflected the blue light of the tactical screen. His 4 eyes moved independently, each one tracking different streams of data. Behind him, 12,000 warships waited in perfect formation. This was the greatest armada ever assembled in Imperial history. And today, they would add another world to the Empire. "Show me the target," Keth Varan commanded. The display shifted to reveal a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star. The planet was covered in water and green landmasses. White clouds swirled across its surface. It looked peaceful. It looked weak. "The natives call it Earth," his science officer reported. "They are a young species. They have only recently developed space travel. Their technology is primitive: chemical rockets, fusion reactors, simple nuclear weapons." Keth Varan made a sound of contempt. "Nuclear weapons? How quaint. My personal shuttle has better armament." The officers around him laughed. They had heard such reports before. Every species looked primitive compared to the Valanthi. That was simply the natural order of things. "What do we know about these humans?" the High Admiral asked. The science officer pulled up more data. "They are a curious species, High Admiral. They evolved on a death world: high gravity, extreme temperatures, dangerous predators, toxic atmosphere. Their planet tries to kill them in countless ways, yet they survived. Death world survivors often make good slaves," Keth Varan noted. "They are strong and adaptable. The labor caste will welcome them." "There is something else, High Admiral. Something unusual." "Speak." The science officer hesitated. "They fight each other. Constantly. Their entire history is filled with war. Nation against nation. Tribe against tribe. They have never known true peace." Keth Varan's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. "They war among themselves? How wasteful. How primitive. Surely this means they are weak and divided." "That was my assessment as well, High Admiral." The High Admiral turned to look at the blue planet one more time. A species that fought itself was a species that could not unite against an outside threat. This would be the easiest conquest of his career. He had brought 12,000 ships to intimidate the humans into immediate surrender. Now he wondered if he had brought too many. "Set course for Earth," he commanded. "Standard invasion formation. We will arrive in their system, broadcast the surrender demand, and have this finished before the sleep cycle." The fleet began to move. 12,000 ships, each one a masterpiece of Valanthi engineering. Each one had taken decades to build by the finest craftsmen in the Empire. Their shields could withstand nuclear strikes. Their weapons could crack planets. Their crews had trained for centuries. Against such power, what could one primitive species do? Keth Varan retired to his private quarters and summoned his family. His mate, Sarilith, arrived with their 3 offspring. It was unusual to bring family on a military campaign, but this was no ordinary mission. This was a demonstration of imperial power, and Keth Varan wanted his children to witness it. "Father, will there be a battle?" his eldest asked eagerly. Keth Varan laughed. "No, child. There will be no battle. The humans will see our fleet and surrender. They will bow before the Imperium, as all species do. You will witness the birth of a new imperial province." "I heard they fight each other," his youngest said. "Why would they do that?" "Because they are primitive," Sarilith answered. "They have not yet learned to work together. They are like animals, fighting over scraps. The Imperium will teach them civilization." Keth Varan nodded in agreement. He had conquered 17 worlds in his career. Each conquest followed the same pattern. Arrive with overwhelming force. Broadcast the surrender demand. Accept the enemy's capitulation. Install imperial governors. Move on to the next target. The humans would be no different. But as the fleet traveled toward the Sol system, something nagged at the back of Kethvaran's mind. Something about the intelligence report bothered him. He pulled up the data again and studied it more carefully. The humans had been fighting each other for their entire existence, thousands of years of constant warfare. They had developed weapons specifically designed to kill other humans. They had built armies and navies and air forces. They had invented tactics and strategies and doctrines. They had studied the art of war more thoroughly than any species the Imperium had ever encountered. And yet, the Volanthi looked at this and saw weakness. They saw a divided species, a primitive species, an easy target. They did not see what humanity truly was. Humanity was not weak because it fought itself. Humanity was times strong times because it fought itself. Every war had taught them lessons. Every battle had made them better. Every conflict had forced them to innovate, to adapt, to overcome. The Volanthi had evolved as apex predators on a paradise world. They had never known true hardship. They had never faced extinction. They had conquered the galaxy not through struggle, but through simple technological superiority. Humans had struggled for every inch of their existence. They had faced ice ages and plagues and predators and disasters. They had survived by being smarter, tougher, and more vicious than anything that tried to kill them. The Volanthi saw humanity's history of warfare as a sign of chaos and weakness. They should have seen it as a warning. They should have understood that a species that spent 10,000 years practicing the art of war would be very, very good at it. But they didn't understand. They couldn't understand. Their arrogance blinded them to the truth, and so 12,000 ships flew toward Earth. Their crews confident and relaxed. Their weapons cold. Their shields lowered. They expected a quick surrender and an easy victory. They had no idea what was waiting for them. In the darkness of space, humanity watched the approaching fleet. Satellites tracked their movement. Telescopes measured their numbers. Computers calculated their trajectory, and deep beneath the mountains of Earth, generals and admirals studied the data and began to plan. The Volanthi were coming to conquer. Humanity was preparing to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The alarms started screaming at 3:47 a.m. Geneva time. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was half asleep at her monitoring station when the Lunar Early Warning Array detected 12,000 unknown objects translating into real space beyond Neptune. She stared at the screen for 3 full seconds, convinced she was dreaming. Then she hit the emergency alert button. Within 60 seconds, every military command center on Earth was awake. General Yuki Tanaka received the call while she was sleeping in her quarters at the United Earth Defense Command headquarters. She listened to the report without interruption. 12,000 alien vessels, unknown configuration, heading directly toward Earth. Estimated arrival, 72 hours. Activate Protocol Omega, she said calmly. Then she dressed and walked to the command center. Protocol Omega was a contingency plan that most politicians had called paranoid and wasteful. It had been developed 30 years ago by military planners who asked a simple question. What if aliens existed? And what if they were hostile? The politicians had laughed and cut the budget. But the military had found ways to continue the work in secret. Now that paranoia would save humanity. General Tanaka entered the command center and found controlled chaos. Officers shouted into communicators. Screens displayed tactical data from across the solar system. The main holographic display showed the alien fleet as a mass of red dots moving steadily inward. Status report, Tanaka demanded. All orbital defense platforms are coming online, her aide reported. The asteroid belt installations are activating. All military vessels have been recalled to defensive positions. Nuclear arsenals are unlocked and ready for deployment. What about the civilian population? Emergency broadcasts are going out now. We're telling them it's a drill, Tanaka nodded. Panic would only make things worse. Better to let the civilians think this was an exercise, while the military prepared for war. On the other side of the solar system, High Admiral Kethvaran watched his fleet approach the inner planets. Everything was proceeding according to plan. His communications officer had already prepared the standard Imperial surrender demand, translated into every human language. Broadcast the message, Kethvaran ordered. The transmission went out on every frequency the Volanthi could generate. It reached Earth 7 minutes later. The message was simple and direct. Surrender immediately. Bow before the Valanthy Imperium. Accept your place as subjects of the Empire. Resistance is futile. Compliance will be rewarded. Defiance will be punished. General Tanaka read the message and felt something cold settle in her stomach. So this was it. First contact with alien life, and they came as conquerors. She had always hoped that when humanity finally met aliens, they would be friendly. She had prepared for the possibility that they would not be. "What is our response?" her communications officer asked. Tanaka thought for a moment. She could try to negotiate. She could ask for time. She could attempt diplomacy. But she had read the message carefully. It was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. These aliens expected immediate and total surrender. They did not know who they were dealing with. "Send this reply," Tanaka said. 2 words. "We decline." C. 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 The message traveled across the void of space. It reached the Valanthy flagship. High Admiral Keth Varan read it and laughed out loud. "They decline?" he said with amusement. "They decline? Do they not understand their situation? Perhaps they need a demonstration, High Admiral." His weapons officer suggested. "No. We will give them time to reconsider. When we arrive in orbit around their world, when they see our fleet blotting out their sun, they will understand. They will beg to surrender." But while Keth Voran waited confidently, humanity was not reconsidering. Humanity was working. Every orbital shipyard began emergency production. Factories that had been building cargo ships started building weapons platforms. Assembly lines that made consumer goods switched to making missiles. Mining stations in the asteroid belt revealed their true purpose. They were not just miners. They were weapons, storage facilities, packed with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. General Tanaka watched the preparations with grim satisfaction. For 30 years, the military had been secretly building humanity's defenses. They had hidden weapons in asteroids. They had disguised warships as cargo freighters. They had stockpiled nuclear weapons and railgun ammunition and missile systems throughout the solar system. The politicians had never known. The public had never known. Only a small group of military officers and scientists had known the truth. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for 3 decades. "How many weapons platforms do we have in the asteroid belt?" Tanaka asked. 47,000 active platforms, General. Another 12,000 can be brought online within 48 hours. Railgun ammunition? Enough for sustained bombardment lasting 6 hours. Nuclear warheads? 50,000 city killers. 10,000 planet busters. Tanaka allowed herself a small smile. The aliens thought they were invading a primitive world. They thought humanity was helpless. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The 72 hours passed in a blur of activity. Humanity worked around the clock. Soldiers took their positions. Ships launched from hidden bases. Weapons platforms completed their targeting solutions. The entire solar system became a fortress. And still the Valanthy came. Confident and unaware. Keth Varan noticed that Earth's visible defense stations had gone dark as his fleet approached. He interpreted this as a sign of defeat. The humans had realized their hopeless situation and were preparing to surrender. "See," he told his family, "I told you there would be no battle. The humans have accepted their fate." His mate Sarilith looked at the tactical display. "Why are they not responding to our communications? They are probably deciding who will have the honor of presenting their surrender." These primitive species always squabble over such things. In truth, humanity had stopped responding because there was nothing left to say. General Tanaka had made her decision. The aliens would not negotiate. They would not show mercy. They would not treat humanity as equals. So humanity would not give them the chance. The Valanthy fleet entered the asteroid belt. 12,000 ships, flying in perfect formation. Shields down. Weapons cold. They were so confident in their superiority that they didn't even consider the possibility of an ambush. General Tanaka watched the tactical display. The enemy fleet was now in optimal firing position. They were surrounded by weapons they couldn't see, targeted by systems they couldn't detect. She took a deep breath. This was the moment. There would be no going back. All stations, she said calmly, fire. The asteroid belt lit up like a second sun. The first warning High Admiral Keth Voran received was when 300 of his ships exploded simultaneously. He was standing on the bridge of the Time's Eternal Blade Asterisk, calmly watching the tactical display, when the red dots representing his fleet began to vanish. At first, he thought it was a sensor malfunction. Then the shockwave from the nearest explosion rocked his flagship, and he realized the truth. They were under attack. "Report!" he screamed. "What is happening?" His tactical officer's hands flew across the controls. "Multiple weapons signatures detected. High Admiral, they're coming from the asteroids. Thousands of them." "That's impossible." Our sensors showed no weapons in this sector, but the evidence was undeniable. The asteroids that had appeared to be simple rocks were revealing their true nature. Hidden compartments opened to expose railguns and missile batteries. Dormant satellites came alive with targeting lasers. What had seemed like empty space was actually a killing ground, and the Volanthi fleet had walked right into it. Railgun projectiles traveling at 1% of light speed tore through Volanthi ships like paper. The vessels had not raised their shields. They had not expected to need them. By the time the order to activate defenses was given, another 2,000 ships had been destroyed. "All ships, raise shields," Keth Voran commanded. "Return fire on those platforms." The surviving ships began to respond. Energy shields flickered into existence. Weapons systems powered up. But humanity had planned for this. The first salvo had been designed to destroy as many ships as possible before they could react. The second salvo was designed to overwhelm their defenses. 50,000 missiles launched from hidden platforms throughout the asteroid belt. Each missile carried a nuclear warhead. Each warhead was powerful enough to destroy a city. Together, they formed a wave of death that swept toward the Volanthi fleet like a tsunami. Keth Voran watched the incoming missiles on his display. His ships began shooting them down. But there were too many. For every missile they destroyed, 10 more got through. The fleet's formation began to break apart as captains tried to maneuver away from the bombardment. "Concentrate fire on the missile platforms," the High Admiral ordered. "Destroy their launch sites." But the platforms were hidden among millions of asteroids. The Volanthi weapons, designed for ship-to-ship combat, were not effective against such small targets. They destroyed dozens of platforms, but hundreds more continued firing. On Earth, General Tanaka watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. The enemy fleet was in chaos. Their perfect formation had dissolved into a panicked mass of ships trying to avoid destruction. The trap had worked exactly as planned. "Enemy losses?" she asked. "Approximately 3,000 ships destroyed in the first 5 minutes, General. Another 2,000 heavily damaged. They're trying to regroup, but our railguns are preventing them from forming a defensive line. Continue the bombardment. Don't give them time to think." The railguns kept firing. Unlike missiles, railgun projectiles were almost impossible to shoot down. They were just chunks of metal accelerated to incredible speeds. They had no heat signature, no guidance systems, nothing for enemy sensors to lock onto. By the time a Volanthi ship detected an incoming projectile, it was already too late. High Admiral Keth Voran could not believe what was happening. His fleet, the greatest armada in Imperial history, was being slaughtered by a species that was supposed to be primitive. Their weapons were crude but devastatingly effective. Their tactics were brutal and relentless. "High Admiral, we need to retreat," his first officer shouted. "We're losing hundreds of ships every minute." "Retreat? The Volanthi Imperium does not retreat. If we stay here, we will be annihilated." Keth Voran looked at the tactical display. His officer was right. The fleet was being destroyed piecemeal. They needed to fall back, regroup, and develop new tactics. But the humans were not giving them that opportunity. Every time a group of ships tried to break away, a concentrated barrage cut them off. The humans were not just fighting, they were herding. They were pushing the Volanthi fleet into denser and denser formations, making them easier targets for the railguns and missiles. "These primitives," Keth Voran whispered. "How are they doing this?" The answer was simple, but he could not understand it. Humanity had spent 10,000 years fighting itself. They had developed an understanding of warfare that the Volanthi could not match. They knew how to set ambushes. They knew how to concentrate fire. They knew how to exploit enemy weaknesses. The Volanthi had conquered 4,000 worlds through technological superiority alone. They had never faced an enemy that could match their cunning. They had never needed strategy because brute force had always been enough. Now brute force was working against them. "Father?" A small voice came from behind Kethvoran. He turned to see his youngest offspring standing in the doorway of the bridge, eyes wide with terror. "Father, what's happening? Why are the ships exploding?" Kethvoran felt something he had never felt before. Fear. Not for himself, but for his family. He had brought them here to witness an easy victory. Instead, he had brought them to their deaths. "Serelith," he called, "take the children to the escape pods, but the escape pods will be even more vulnerable. Do it now." As his family rushed off the bridge, Kethvoran turned back to the battle. His fleet had lost 6,000 ships. Half his armada was gone, and the bombardment showed no signs of stopping. The humans just kept firing. Wave after wave of projectiles and missiles. An endless storm of destruction. "Hi, Admiral. We're receiving transmissions from multiple ships. They're asking permission to surrender." Surrender. The word tasted like poison. The Volanthi Imperium had never surrendered. In 50,000 years of conquest, not one Imperial fleet had ever lowered its colors. But Kethvoran looked at his children's faces in his mind. He thought of his mate. He thought of all the families aboard the other ships. "Broadcast on all Imperial frequencies," he said heavily. "All ships are authorized to surrender. Transmit the standard capitulation codes." The surrender signal went out. Across the fleet, surviving ships stopped firing and broadcast their surrender on every Volanthi frequency. They lowered their shields as a sign of submission. They waited for the humans to acknowledge their defeat. The humans did not acknowledge anything. They kept firing. "They're not stopping!" the tactical officer screamed. "They're still attacking!" Kethvoran stared at the display in horror. The humans were ignoring their surrender. The bombardment continued without pause. Ships that had lowered their shields were destroyed instantly. Crews that had stopped fighting were killed without mercy. What Kethvoran didn't know was that humans couldn't hear the surrender. The Volanthi were transmitting on frequencies that human sensors couldn't detect. To humanity, the alien fleet was still fighting, still a threat, still an enemy that needed to be destroyed, and humanity was very, very good at destroying its enemies. The massacre continued. The battle lasted 9 hours. When it was over, not a single Volanthi ship remained intact. General Tanaka stood in the command center, surrounded by exhausted officers, and watched the final enemy signature disappear from the tactical display. 12,000 alien warships had entered the solar system. 0 had survived. It was the most complete military victory in human history. "Confirm total enemy destruction," she ordered. "Confirmed, General. No surviving Volanthi vessels detected. We're picking up some escape pods and debris, but no functional ships." Tanaka nodded slowly. She felt no joy, no triumph, only a deep weariness and a cold understanding of what humanity had just done. They had annihilated an entire fleet. Tens of thousands of alien beings had died in the past 9 hours. Perhaps hundreds of thousands. "Begin search and rescue operations," she said. "Any survivors are to be taken prisoner and treated according to military conventions. General, are you sure that's wise? These aliens came to conquer us, and they failed, but we are not savages. We don't slaughter helpless prisoners." The rescue ships launched from Earth orbit and began combing through the debris field. They found surprisingly few survivors. Most Volanthi ships had been destroyed so completely that nothing remained but twisted metal and frozen atmosphere. The few escape pods they recovered contained terrified aliens who had never imagined such a defeat was possible. On what remained of the Times, Eternal Blade *, High Admiral Kethvoran was still alive. His flagship had been one of the last ships destroyed, its superior construction allowing it to survive longer than the others. But even the greatest ship in the Imperial fleet, could not withstand the combined firepower of humanity's arsenal. The final hit had breached the hull and killed most of the bridge crew. Keth Voran himself had been thrown against a wall and knocked unconscious. When he woke, he found himself floating in zero gravity, surrounded by the bodies of his officers. Emergency lighting flickered weakly. The air was thin and getting thinner. The ship was dying around him. "Saralith?" he called weakly. "Children?" No answer came. He tried to activate his communication device, but it was broken. He was alone in the wreckage of his command, the last survivor of the greatest military disaster in Imperial history. How had this happened? He kept asking himself that question as he floated through the destroyed bridge. The humans were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to surrender at the sight of the Imperial fleet. They were not supposed to be capable of this, but capability was exactly what they had demonstrated. The humans had not just defended themselves. They had sprung a trap so perfect, so devastating, that the entire Imperial Armada had been destroyed in less than a day. They had shown levels of military planning and coordination that surpassed anything the Empire had ever encountered. Keth Voran finally understood what the intelligence reports had truly meant. The humans fought each other constantly, because they were always preparing for war. Their entire civilization was built around the assumption that conflict was inevitable. They did not see war as an unusual event, as the Valanthi did. They saw it as a natural part of existence, and when war came, they were ready. A light appeared in the distance. Keth Voran watched as a human vessel approached the wreckage of his flagship. It was small compared to Valanthi ships, but it moved with precision and purpose. A docking tube extended and connected to the hull. Minutes later, humans in military uniforms entered the wrecked bridge. They moved carefully, weapons ready, checking every corner for threats. When they found Keth Voran floating among the debris, they trained their weapons on him. "Don't move," one of them commanded in heavily accented Valanthi. Keth Voran raised his hands slowly. "I surrender," he said. "I am High Admiral Keth Voran, commander of this fleet. I surrender." The humans exchanged glances. They lowered their weapons slightly, but remained cautious. "We're going to take you aboard our ship," the leader said. "You will be treated as a prisoner of war. Do you understand?" "Yes." They escorted him through the docking tube and onto their vessel. It was cramped and utilitarian compared to Valanthi ships, but it was intact and functional. Keth Voran was taken to a small room with a single chair and told to wait. Hours passed. Finally, the door opened and a human woman entered. She was older, with gray hair and a stern face. She wore a uniform covered in medals and insignia. Keth Voran recognized the markings of a senior military commander. "I am General Yuki Tanaka," she said. "I commanded Earth's defense forces during the battle. You are the one who destroyed my fleet." "Yes." Keth Voran looked at her with a mixture of hatred and respect. "How? How did you know we were coming? How did you prepare such a defense?" Tanaka sat down across from him. "We didn't know you were coming. We've been preparing for this scenario for 30 years. We assumed that if aliens existed, they might be hostile. We planned accordingly." 30 years? You built all those weapons in 30 years? "We build weapons very quickly. It's something we're good at." Keth Voran remembered the intelligence reports. Humans fought each other constantly. They had been perfecting the art of war for 10,000 years. Of course they could build weapons quickly. They had been doing it forever. "My family," he said suddenly. "My mate and children were aboard the flagship. Did you find them?" Tanaka's expression softened slightly. "We recovered several escape pods from your ship." "I'll have my people check." She gave an order into her communicator. A few minutes later, she received a response. Her face remained neutral, but something in her eyes changed. "Your mate and children were found in an escape pod," she said. "They are alive and unharmed. They will be held as prisoners, but they will not be mistreated." Keth Voran felt tears forming in his eyes. He had never cried before. Valanthi did not cry. But in that moment, he could not help himself. His family was alive. Amid the total destruction of his fleet and his pride, his family had survived. "Thank you," he whispered. Tanaka nodded. "We are not monsters, Admiral. We defend ourselves when threatened, but we do not enjoy killing. Your people came to conquer us. We did what we had to do. You do not understand what you have done," Kethvaran said quietly. "The Imperium will not ignore this defeat. They will send more ships, larger fleets. They will not stop until Earth is destroyed." Tanaka leaned forward. "Then we will destroy them too. And if they send more after that, we will destroy those as well. We have been fighting since before your species existed, Admiral. We do not surrender. We do not submit. We do not know how." Kethvaran looked into her eyes and saw something that chilled him to his core. It was not anger or hatred. It was certainty. This woman knew exactly what humanity was capable of, and she had no doubt about their ability to defend themselves against anything the Empire could send. "You are a terrifying species," he said finally. Tanaka stood up. "We prefer to think of ourselves as survivors." She walked to the door, then paused. "Your navigation data is being recovered from the wreckage. Soon we will know where you came from. I suggest you convince your Imperium that coming here again would be a mistake." She left Kethvaran alone with his thoughts and his despair. The Empire had never known defeat. Now they would learn what it meant to face a species that had been practicing for war since the beginning of its existence. And Kethvaran knew, with terrible certainty, that the galaxy would never be the same. The Valanthi homeworld learned of the disaster 6 months later, when a human probe arrived in orbit. The probe was small and simple, no larger than a ground transport vehicle. It appeared without warning, bypassing all sensor networks and defense systems. Before anyone could react, it began broadcasting a message in perfect Valanthi. "You sent 12,000 ships to our world. None returned. Your High Admiral is our prisoner. Your fleet has been destroyed. We have recovered your navigation data. We know where you live. This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact." The message continued with a simple ultimatum. Leave humanity alone. And humanity would leave the Imperium alone. Send another fleet, and humanity would respond. The choice was theirs. Emperor Kaelith watched the recording in his throne room, surrounded by his advisors and generals. His 4 eyes burned with rage. No one had ever spoken to the Valanthi Imperium this way. No species had ever dared to threaten them. "Assemble every ship in the Empire," he commanded. "We will crush these insects once and for all." His advisors exchanged worried glances. The destruction of the Time's eternal conquest times had shaken the foundations of imperial power. Word of the defeat had already spread to other conquered worlds. There were whispers of rebellion, rumors of resistance. The Empire needed a victory to restore its reputation, but some of the generals were not so eager. "Majesty," one of them said carefully, "we should consider the implications. The humans destroyed 12,000 ships with weapons we didn't even know existed. What else might they have? You suggest we show cowardice? You suggest we bow before primitives? I suggest we gather intelligence before committing another fleet." The humans were clearly more prepared than we anticipated. Emperor Kaelith silenced him with a glare. "I will not negotiate with animals. I will not show weakness. The Imperium has ruled for 50,000 years because we do not hesitate. Assemble the fleet." 1 year after the destruction of the Time's eternal conquest asterisk, a new Valanthi Armada departed for Earth. This time they sent 20,000 ships, equipped with the best technology the Empire could produce. This time they were prepared for resistance. They never reached the solar system. Humanity had spent the past year building. They had taken the technology from captured Valanthi ships and reverse-engineered it. They had combined alien knowledge with human innovation. And they had constructed something new. The Valanthi called it impossible when they first detected it. A ship the size of a small moon, traveling at speeds their sensors could barely track. It intercepted the Imperial fleet 3 light-years from Earth and broadcast a single message. "Turn back now. This is your final warning." Admiral Torak, commander of the Second Invasion Fleet, laughed at the warning. 1 ship against 20,000? The humans were clearly bluffing. The humans were not bluffing. The ship fired a single weapon. A beam of concentrated antimatter struck the center of the Volanthi formation and erased 1,000 ships from existence in an instant. The explosion was visible from nearby star systems. Admiral Torak ordered a full retreat. But the human ship was faster. It pursued the fleeing Volanthi, picking off ships one by one. By the time the survivors made it back to Imperial space, only 3,000 remained. News of the second defeat spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Volanthi Imperium had dominated known space for 50,000 years. Their military power had been unquestioned. Their authority had been absolute. Now they had lost 2 fleets to a species they had dismissed as primitive, and then the humans came to visit. A single human vessel appeared in orbit around the Volanthi homeworld. It was not a warship. It was an ambassador ship, carrying representatives from Earth who wished to speak with the Emperor. Emperor Kalith could have destroyed the ship. His orbital defenses were more than capable. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was wisdom. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was simple curiosity about the species that had humiliated his empire twice. He agreed to meet with the human ambassador. General Tanaka walked into the Imperial throne room with the same calm expression she had worn throughout the war. She was old now, but her eyes were sharp and her posture was straight. She showed no fear before the alien emperor, who could have had her killed with a word. "You wanted to conquer us," she said simply. "You failed. You tried again. You failed again. Now we have a choice to make, both of us." "What choice?" Emperor Kalith demanded. "Peace or extinction. Yours or ours. We have the technology now. We have ships that can reach your homeworld in weeks. We have weapons that can crack planets. You have seen what we can do. The question is whether you want to see more." The Emperor's hands gripped his throne. "You would not dare. If you attacked our homeworld, every species in the galaxy would unite against you. Perhaps. Or perhaps they would celebrate. We have spoken with some of your subject species. They do not love you, Emperor. They endure you. Because they have no choice. Give them a choice, and many would choose differently." Tanaka stepped closer. "But we don't want war. We never wanted war. You came to us. You threatened our world. We defended ourselves. That is all. We have no interest in conquest. We have no desire for empire. We simply want to be left alone. And if we refuse?" Tanaka reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. She activated it, and a holographic display appeared in the air between them. It showed a rocky moon orbiting the Volanthi homeworld. "Watch that moon," she said. Far above the atmosphere, invisible to the naked eye, a small object hurtled toward the moon at incredible speed. It was a simple iron projectile, accelerated to 90% of the speed of light. A relativistic kill vehicle. The simplest and most devastating weapon humanity had ever created. The projectile struck the moon. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface. Where a moon had orbited for 4 billion years, there was now only an expanding cloud of debris and fire. The shockwave rippled through space, a visible reminder of what humanity was capable of. "That was uninhabited," Tanaka said calmly. "The next one won't be." Emperor Kalith stared at the destruction in horror. His advisors were speechless. His generals looked like they wanted to flee the room. "What do you want?" the Emperor whispered. "I told you. Peace. You leave us alone. We leave you alone. Your empire can continue to exist. Your people can continue their lives. But you will never threaten Earth again, and you will release your slave species to choose their own destinies. You ask us to dismantle our empire. I ask you to stop being tyrants. The choice is yours. But choose quickly. My government's patience is not infinite." 2 days later, the Volanthi Imperium signed a peace treaty with Earth. They agreed to never send military vessels to the Sol system. They agreed to free any species that wished to leave the Empire. They agreed to recognize humanity as a sovereign power equal to their own. The galaxy watched in amazement as the greatest empire in history bent its knee to a species that had been unknown just 2 years before. Word spread to every corner of known space. A new power had risen. A species from a death world, in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, had defeated the Volanthi and forced them to surrender. They called themselves humans. Other species had different names for them. The Volanthi called them the Unstoppables. The freed slaves called them the Liberators. The wise called them the Warning. But across the galaxy, one name became most common. It was spoken in fear and respect, in whisper and shout, in 100 different languages, on 1,000 different worlds. Deathworlders. The Deathworlders had arrived on the galactic stage, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Somewhere on Earth, General Tanaka retired to a small house by the ocean. She had saved her species and changed the course of galactic history. Now she wanted nothing more than to watch the waves and enjoy the peace she had won. But she kept a